We're going to start in Genesis chapter 42 this evening. Genesis chapter 42. We're going to pick up in the story of Joseph's life. But this section certainly is about Joseph, but it really focuses in some ways more on Joseph's brothers, especially his brother Judah. And you might remember we talked about Joseph a few weeks ago, and we were looking at. Is there anybody back there?
Keith, I thought Keith's back there sleeping.
He's sleeping back there.
He's got you now.
Okay, all right, there we go. Thank you. All right. Now, you might remember we looked a couple of weeks ago at Joseph, and we talked about how he persevered through his challenges. And perseverance, the idea that sometimes there are things placed upon you, burdens that are there. I called it monkeys on your back, that you didn't ask for, maybe, that you didn't look for, but there they are in some ways. You know, Joseph was sold into slavery. He wasn't looking for that, but there it is. But that if we just do the right thing anyway, we don't choose sin to get the monkeys off of our back, but we just do the right thing anyway, that Joseph showed us that eventually, in the right time, God does lift those burdens off of our back. Now that really continues in Genesis 42, and that's Joseph's brothers and his father have some burdens on their back. It starts in verse 1 of Genesis 42. Jacob saw that there was grain in Egypt. Remember, there's a famine in the land. And he saw that there was grain in Egypt, and Jacob said to his sons, "Why do you look at one another?" And he said, "Indeed, I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down to that place and buy for us there, that we may live and not die." All right, so here's their burden to start with. There's a famine, and they have no bread. They have no grain to feed their livestock. They're looking at starvation. Now turn to the end of this section, Genesis chapter 47 and verse 12, and see, God does lift this off of their back. Genesis chapter 47 and verse 12. Then Joseph provided his father, his brothers, and all his father's household with bread, according to the number in their families. And so between Genesis 42 and Genesis 47:12, we see God lifts that burden on their back. But it's the things that happen in between. It's the story that takes place in the middle that shows us about perseverance, about being faithful to God despite our burdens. And it teaches us an important lesson about sacrifice. And so that's what we're going to focus on tonight, especially through the eyes of his brother Judah. Perseverance and sacrifice. Now, Genesis 42 sets the stage, and it sets the stage by showing us the problem that they're really dealing with is more than famine, but it's about Benjamin and the perception that Benjamin is in danger. Right? Jacob tells his sons to go to Egypt and to get grain, but he says, not Benjamin. Right? Now, Benjamin is his youngest son, and Benjamin is the only other son besides Joseph that was born to his favorite wife, Rachel. And so, as far as Jacob is concerned, Benjamin is the last of Rachel's sons. And so he says, I can't risk losing Benjamin the way that I lost Joseph. And so the brothers go to Egypt, and they find that there is grain there. Now, Joseph, you remember, he's the one that Pharaoh had the dreams, and he interpreted them about this famine that was coming, 7 good years followed by 7 years of famine. And so Pharaoh had made him in charge of all of these things. And so if you come to Egypt and you want grain, you have to go through Joseph. And maybe Joseph even expected they might come at some point, but he sees them coming, and he decides that he's going to test his brothers. Now, this is not a kind of test where he's getting back at them. Right? We'll see as we go through this story. There's not vengeance involved for Joseph. It seems like really his intention is trying to figure out, have they changed or not? Are they any different from the boys who sold him into slavery to now, which it's been, nearly to about 20 years, time has passed. Are they any different than how they were back then? And so when he sees them and he decides he's going to test them, he says, "You're foreigners," and he accuses them of being spies in the land. And he asks them some questions. He says, is your father still alive? Yes, our father as well. Do you have another brother? He's so specific, isn't he? Do you have another brother? We have one more. Well, we have two more, but one is gone, and we have the other one at home. He says, all right. He puts them in prison. We're having troubles, aren't we? He puts them in prison for 3 days, but then he pulls them out and he says, it's not fair to let your father starve. I will send home all of you except for one. And he keeps Simeon in prison, and he says, if you ever want to see Simeon again, prove it. Bring your brother Benjamin back with you. Prove that you have another brother, and I'll let you all go home together. And so they all go home. Now he has another trick up his sleeve that they don't know about. He's taken all the money that they paid for the grain, and he's stuck it into their top of their sacks. And so they get home, and they tell their father what happened. This man was rough with us. He kept Simeon there. He says, we will not be able to see Simeon again unless we take Benjamin back. Then they open up their sacks and see that they're afraid they're going to be accused of robbery, of stealing the money and the grain. And so they're terrified. And Jacob says, absolutely not. You will not take Benjamin back. Reuben stands up. He's the oldest son. He's the firstborn son. He's going to take charge. And he says, listen, I will treat, in essence, what he says is, I'll treat Benjamin like he is my own son. I will make sure that he comes back. But Reuben has already messed up his relationship with his father. He's already proven himself untrustworthy. You go back to Genesis chapter 35. Genesis chapter 35 and verse 22. Genesis 35:22, and it happened when Israel dwelt in that land that Reuben went and lay with Bilhah, his father's concubine, and Israel, or Jacob, heard about it. Now this is kind of an icky thing. And this was an ancient kind of way of communicating. In essence, what Reuben was saying is, I think that my father is too old and too weak to be the leader of our house anymore. And so I'm asserting my right to take his place. Right? That's what that is about in that verse. Now, it didn't work, clearly. Jacob is still in charge. But that's what he was trying to communicate. His perception was there was a burden. There's a monkey on his back. My father is too old to lead us. So he turned to sin to get the monkey off his back. And now, when the family needs someone to be able to convince Jacob to let them take Benjamin back, Reuben has there's consequences for his sin. He has messed that up. Jacob says no. Time goes on and they're hungry again. All the grain went out. Remember, Joseph knows how long the famine's going to last. He interpreted the dream for Pharaoh. He knows it's going to be 7 years. The brothers aren't privy to all that information. They don't know how long the famine's going to last. And so Joseph knows the amount of grain they've taken home is not going to last them 7 years. He knows they have to come back, and if they want more grain, that they have to bring Benjamin with them. And so sure enough time goes by. But this time, it's Judah that stands up. It's Judah that takes the lead. And he says, Father, we have to take Benjamin back. We have to do it. He's going to starve here, and you're going to lose him anyway if we don't take Benjamin back. Now, this is the Judah. Remember, Judah is the one who led his brothers to sell Joseph into slavery in the first place. You can see that back in Genesis chapter 37. Genesis 37 and verses 26 and 27. Right? Judah was the one who said, yeah, let's make some profit off of this and get rid of that dreamer, right? That troublemaker Joseph. This is the Judah who, in Genesis chapter 38, causes so much trouble for his daughter-in-law Tamar. Right? He does some wicked things. And this is the Judah, but also he's the Judah at the end of chapter 38, when he is confronted with his sins, who repents of his sins, and who shows that it's this little glimmering hope that maybe the Judah is the kind of person who can change. And so Judah takes the lead and he convinces his father, but really, when you look at it, what is it that Jacob puts his trust in at the end of the day? Genesis chapter 43 and verse 14. Genesis 43 and verse 14. And may God Almighty give you mercy before that man, that he may release to you your other brother and Benjamin. And if I am bereaved, I am bereaved. At the end of the day, he says, there is a burden on our back that we did not ask for. that there's this man who expects you to bring Benjamin. There's a famine. None of that's under Jacob's control. And he says, I just have to trust God that he is going to work this out. And so the right thing to do is to send Benjamin. And that's been the theme all the way through this. Just do the right thing despite the monkeys on your back. God really does work it out. And so they go, and they're terrified, because it looks like they're thieves, but they end up in Joseph's house, and he throws a big feast for them. And he puts some little clues in there for them that they don't quite understand right away. When they feast, he sets them in order, birth order, from Reuben on down to Benjamin in their order. How does this man know our birth order? How does he know how old we all are? And then he gives Benjamin more food than anybody else, kind of showing a preference or a favoritism for that particular brother. These little clues for them that they don't know what to make of. And then they buy their grain, and they're all heading home. Benjamin is safe. Everything is good until Joseph has more surprises for them. He's put all of their money back in their bag again, and he's taken a silver cup from his house, and he puts it in Benjamin's bag. And he sends his servants after them to pull them over on the side of the road and do a search for those things. And they're indignant, how dare you accuse us of stealing things? We are not thieves. And if you find that cup, anyone, that one you can take with you. And sure enough, there it is. The worst case possible scenario. The one person that they guaranteed and promised would come home no matter what. The cup is in his bag. And so back to Egypt they all go. And you notice, Joseph has been so clever in how he has put all of this together, because he has created the scenario to where he takes his father's favorite son and puts him in the position where the brothers can be rid of him and maybe even profit off of getting rid of him and just go home as if he never existed, just like they did to Joseph. He creates, as close as possible, the exact same scenario that he was in when they hated him all those years ago. And so they all go back. And first Judah stands up and he says, listen, we'll all be your slaves. Right? Keep all 11 of us. We're not going to abandon Benjamin here, and we are not going to go home to our father without him. So we'll all be your slaves. Right? That's a good sign. But then Joseph turns on him and he says, no, I'm not that ridiculous of a person, right? He says, you can all go home. I'll just keep Benjamin. Right? That one person, if they had not changed, if Judah and his brothers were the exact same greedy, selfish people that they were all of those years ago, they would have jumped at this opportunity. Glad to be rid of their father's favorite son, glad to be rid of the one who caused them so much grief, glad to take all that money and just go on back home without him. They would have jumped at that situation. And when they left, Benjamin would not be with them anymore. He'd be with the second in command of all of Egypt. Joseph was not going to put Benjamin in slavery. He was going to take care of him as his older brother. And so he would keep Benjamin safe from them. You figure Joseph is thinking, if they don't, they're going to do it eventually, if they're going to do it at all. They're going to get rid of Benjamin somehow or another, if they're like they were back then. And so he's keeping Benjamin safe. But if they have changed, then he's able to reconnect with his whole family. And we come to really the meat of this story in chapter 44, when Judah stands up. And in essence, what he says is, it would kill my father to go home without Benjamin. And so I will take his place. I will take his place. I will be your slave. Just please, whatever you do, send my brother Benjamin home. And in that one moment, I think Judah probably surpasses Joseph's expectations in every possible way. And in that one moment, what Judah does is he takes what's best for his father and he puts it over what's best for him. And you think, we've looked so far, sometimes burdens are put on our back that we didn't ask for. And we just have to bear them. Right? Until God lifts them off, we just do the right thing. We didn't ask for them. Sometimes we put burdens on our own back through sin. Sometimes we choose sin, and there are consequences that linger. And we what we see is you just do the right thing after that, and eventually those might be lifted, but we put them there. But what Judah does here is he takes the burden off of Benjamin's back, and he willingly puts it onto his own back. And it's the right thing to do. It's an instance where putting a monkey on your own back is the right thing to do. And you think, Judah, in chapter 38, he shows us that he is willing to repent when he does the wrong thing. Now, Judah, it's from Judah that we get to David, and it's his line that we get to David, and then eventually from David we get to Christ. And so the Christ is in the line of Judah. And what Judah is in chapter 38, he is just the perfect example of the kind of person that the Christ would come and die for, the kind of person who would repent whenever they do the wrong thing. But here, in chapter 44, Judah becomes an antitype of the Christ to come. You know, we talk about antitypes and types, and Judah becomes a picture of what the Christ would be. Because isn't that exactly what Christ does for us? You read about this in 2 Corinthians chapter 5 and verse 21. 2 Corinthians chapter 5 and verse 21. It says, for God made Jesus who knew no sin to be sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God through him. Christ saw that we had chosen sin, and so he willingly came, and on the cross, he took that burden off of our back, the guilt of our sin that would separate us from God forever. He took that burden off of our back, and he put it onto his own back, and he said, I will bear that burden for you, because there's no way that you could get that burden off of your own back. And so he takes our sin for us. It was right for Jesus to put a monkey on his back in sacrificing himself so that we would have that opportunity and chance to have eternal life. That's exactly what Judah does for his father. He says his father would die if Benjamin did not go home. And so he put the burden off of Benjamin's back onto his back to save his father from that fate, sacrificing himself in the process. Judah is an example here of what the New Testament calls agape love. And so chapter 45 then. Chapter 45, we come back around to Joseph. And this is all just too much for Joseph. Now, we haven't really focused very much on Joseph so far. If we had been, though, what we would have seen is pretty much every time that Joseph is in the same room with his brothers, he finds it very emotionally difficult, and he just keeps leaving the room abruptly, breaking down in tears. This is not a man who is seeking vengeance. He is having a really hard time with this, and he wants to be with them. And here, he just can't handle it anymore. And so we see that he sends all of his servants, all the Egyptians out of the room so that he can break down and just tell them who he is. And at first, they're terrified. They don't even know what to think about it. But he assures them that he doesn't have any kind of harm against them. And in fact, he tells them over and over again. Notice verse 5. In chapter 45, and in verse 5, he says, but now do not therefore be grieved or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me here to preserve life. Right? Verse 7, he says, God sent me before you to preserve a posterity for you in the earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. And so now it was not you who sent me here, but God. And he has made me a father to Pharaoh and Lord of all his house and a ruler throughout all the land of Egypt. Right? And he tells them, he says, what you meant for evil, God was able to take it, and he was able to lift those evil things off of my back and work it all out for good. You can see the hand of providence, as often I think we can when we look back on our lives, and in the moment we just don't understand why this is happening, but later we look back and we see exactly what God had planned, exactly what God is doing. We just can't lose that hope and that trust when it gets hard, because Joseph shows us if we just keep that faith, we'll look back on it later and we'll say, now I understand. Now I can see why God allowed all of these things to happen. And so he sends the brothers home with wagons, big wagons, and he loads up the family. Jacob hears that Joseph is alive, and at first it says his heart stands still. He doesn't believe it. But then he sees all those wagons from Egypt, and it says his spirit is revived. And we see God is lifting these burdens, decades worth of burdens, right off of their backs. They go on to Egypt, and describes all of their family goes to Egypt, and he's reunited with his son. He even meets the Pharaoh, and he blesses Pharaoh. That's kind of a neat thing, that Jacob is so highly esteemed, he blesses Pharaoh. And then, of course, as we saw at the end of 47 and verse 12, that he lifts the burden of their hunger, of their starvation, of their lack of bread. He lifts all of those burdens off of their backs. And it was only possible because Joseph just kept doing the right thing. And because Judah was willing to sacrifice himself, even if it meant putting a burden on his back in order to save his father, it was only possible because they did those things throughout their hardships. Sometimes we just can't figure out why God allows certain things to happen to us. Why we got sick, or why our family troubles are happening, why we lost people that we love, why we're going through financial troubles. But God knows exactly how to work it out. He knows exactly how to make it good. And so the thing to do, just persevere. Keep being obedient. Keep being faithful. Trust that the day will come. Trust God so much that you would intentionally add another burden to your own shoulders, if that's what it would take to do the right thing and to save another person, just like Judah was willing to do, just like Christ did for each and every one of us. You know, God worked it out for Judah. And God certainly worked it out for Christ when he was raised from the dead, when he ascended into heaven. God worked it out. Trust him. He will work it out for you too. And if there is some way that we can help you to persevere through your burdens, if there is counsel that we can offer or prayers that we can give, if there's any way that we can help you, we ask that you come forward as we stand and as we sing.